Hello and welcome to the London Legal Podcast, presented by Hodge, Jones and Allen Solicitors. Our leading solicitors share their views on latest legal issues and developments, and how the law might affect you, because we care about righting wrongs and providing first-class personal legal services. So please enjoy this, the London Legal Podcast, presented by Hodge, Jones and Allen Solicitors.
Hello and welcome to another instalment of the London Legal Podcast. I'm Leticia Williams and I'm head of the personal injury team here at Hodge, Jones and Allen. I'm delighted to be joined by one of our partners, Riffat, Yaqub, and the Chief Executive of Headway Suffolk, Helen Fairweather. Riffat, would you like to say a few words by way of introduction?
Hello, I'm Riffat Yaqub and I'm a partner in the personal injury team at Hodge, Jones and Allen. I have over 25 years of experience working solely for injured claimants. Over those years, I've specialised in catastrophic and life-changing injury claims, and as a consequence have a very good understanding about the immediate help a client and their family may need when they have been faced with a life-changing injury. Helen, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Helen Fairweather, Chief Exec of Headway Suffolk, a position I've held for nearly 19 years, helping brain-injured survivors get back to some sort of normality life or some independence.
So Helen, can you tell us a bit more about yourself and your role at the charity?
As Chief Exec, I have legal responsibility for the charity to make sure we're abiding by charitable law and employment law and everything is running smoothly. I also help with the development and setting up new services. And very importantly, we run a home care service, which means that we're regulated with CQC. So I'm the nominated individual, which means that I hold legal responsibility to make sure that we're compliant and delivering a safe service.
Having worked with Headway for a number of years, I've seen firsthand the brilliant work that Headway, the support workers and the charity do for families that have suffered traumatic brain injury. I think it would be useful if we could hear from you as to what happens when a family first contacts Headway.
We have contact from various people. It could be families or the person themselves or other professionals, clinicians, GPs. And what we do is we just ask the professional for a contact number and name. And then we go out and we meet the person to find out what service they'd like, what's been going on, what's happening, what their goals are, a little bit about their personal history. We like to know what they did as a job because that gives us some idea of the level they are performing at. And then from that, we would invite them into the hubs if they wanted a day service so they could see for themselves whether that's something they wanted. If it was home care, then we would look very carefully at the staff that we'd got, the time that somebody wanted home care, and try and match them up. So it's a bit like a dating service to make sure we have the right staff going into the client. It's very bespoke. And home care is at any time that anybody wants it. So one person, we used to take him fishing at 2 o'clock in the morning because that's when he wanted to have his rehab. So it really is bespoke, and he really is at any time that anybody wants it. The day hubs are open 5 days a week. We have a big one in Ipswich and one in Bury St Edmunds. Every now and again, we'll open a pop-up hub in a market town when demand dictates that it's needed. And again, people are invited in. We decide with them what activities they'd like to take part in and the goals and how we're going to achieve those goals. So we might well get involved, the physiotherapist, the OT, the speech and language therapist, if we feel that people would benefit from that help. We also have a mental health nurse who's there to help people with the emotional side, getting used to having a different life, not necessarily a worse life, but a different life, and helping them to come to terms with what's happened. But very importantly as well, we support the family carers because their life has changed without warning. I have chosen to work with people with brain injury. Our family carers haven't. It's happened to them. So we very much want to give them support so that their loved ones can stay living at home and don't have to go into expensive nursing or residential care. We offer a very good understanding brain injury course. So as soon as we've got 6 or 8 new clients, we put together a course which is led by our therapists and clinicians, telling people what the brain does, what happens when it's injured and how to make recovery. And we've been doing that now for about 15 years and nobody's ever come out of that course saying that was a waste of time. Everybody's really learned something. They've had a chance to tell their story if they choose to. And they've made new friendships, which is really important because nearly all our clients lose their friends because their personality has changed and people don't accept that, and maybe they're scared or worried about what's happened. So our clients can be quite lonely, sometimes even family walk away. So Headway becomes their new support system, their new family. And very quickly, people make new friends and are supported by the other clients. So the hubs work really well. And if somebody doesn't find the hub is for them, maybe they've never been a mixer, never been into groups or anything, then they can have whatever support they want out in community.
Thanks, Helen. That's really interesting to know people's first concerns and how you can provide immediate help and the wealth of different help that's actually available to them. So one of the questions we get asked a lot is, why do people need a solicitor and how can they help a brain injured family? Now, our answer would be that the NHS are fantastic at providing medical help, particularly in the first few weeks after a trauma. But people need to remember their primary job is to get you well enough to be discharged or moved to a more specialist ward or hospital. However, as we've all seen in the press recently, with long waiting times and often stretched resources, it's often difficult to get the treatment you need quickly. Now, what we would say is by instructing a solicitor early, they can liaise with the defendant insurer and get you the early rehabilitation and that treatment required to start rebuilding your life. So in our experience, financial compensation is not necessarily the first and only thing seriously injured clients need or want. They want to get better quickly. And to do this, they need the best and earliest rehab intervention. For example, Helen, I'm sure you're aware, studies show that in order to make the best recovery from a brain injury, intensive rehab is most effective in the first 12 to 24 months. And that's where we can really help. So, Helen, from your experience, why is it important for families to receive legal support?
I think it's to make sure that they get the finance and the compensation they need so that they can have the best possible rehab. And as you said, waiting lists are very long. A lot of clients need level 2 neuro rehab, and there's actually only 6 beds in Suffolk. So that's very, very limited. So if somebody has compensation, then they can look further afield maybe, or purchase those beds and get in quickly. Because there's such demand and because there's so few beds, it does mean that some people do not get the level 2 neuro rehab. And even coming somewhere like Headway, maybe once they've been through residential neuro rehab, there's a waiting list for us to get that funding from social services, and that is such valuable time that people are losing sitting at home without any rehab, not being stimulated, families getting stressed. Whereas if they've got compensation, they could basically come to Headway Suffolk the next week. You know, as soon as we've done our assessment and we've agreed with them, they could start immediately. And I hate having to say that to families. You know, if you can pay, if you've got compensation, you can start next week. If we've got to wait for social services to agree the funding, it could be 6 months, it could even be a year. And by that time, you've lost that golden hour. So it's really important they get the correct legal advice as early as possible, so they get the maximum compensation possible, so they get the rehab, so they then make the fullest possible recovery and reach their full potential.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful, because through the claims process, although it takes some time to come to the end of the claims process, during that claims process, we're able to obtain interim payments, and also under the rehabilitation code, we're able to have access to specialists who are able to help and assist not only the injured person, but their family, provide them with support, assistance throughout the claim. And it's a really challenging time for the family, having suffered a life-changing injury. And I think through the claim process, we can really assist, and we can complement what the NHS and other services can provide.
Absolutely, I totally agree with that. I mean, it's just really important people get as much help from whoever as soon as possible.
That's right. In light of recent events, what do you feel are the current challenges the charity are facing?
I think the first challenge we had way back in March, April last year was to keep going. And it was very scary times, and we provide a vital service. We're frontline workers, especially home care. So we had to keep going. So when everybody else was talking about furlough and time off, my staff were working extremely hard. I find it quite comical when people ask me, am I back in the office? I've never left the office. We had to keep going. And obviously funding was a key worry. We didn't know if we were going to be funded. For the people who weren't coming into the day centre, even though our Ipswich hub, we actually did keep open a bit like the schools did, For those who were being looked after by other key workers who needed to go out to work, we looked after their loved ones throughout. And so that was a worry where we were going to get the funding to keep going. Actually, it wasn't as bad as we thought it was going to be, but some of the funding we had to prop us up has now gone. And so we're having to stand on our own 2 feet again. And not everybody's come back to the hub because they're still scared or not had the vaccines. And we're waiting for people who've been referred during COVID lockdowns to actually now get their funding and come to Headway. So there's a bit of a gap. So funding is always a worry. And of course, we're worried what's going to happen during the winter. Are we going to be locked down again? And if so, how do we keep a service for our clients? Because what we were doing was providing 2 services, face-to-face and virtual, doing rehab on Zoom and Teams, sending out activity books, sending out food parcels. And of course, all that took staffing time and cost. So very difficult times. And like all care sector workers, we are worried about recruitment. Our recruitment isn't too bad. It's not as bad as other people are saying. Our retention is quite good. But as our demand on our services go up, especially in home care, then the worry is, are we going to get the staff that we need? And if those staff go off sick or have to self-isolate, we still have to provide that service. So it's very challenging times. And I think we're all worried about the winter.
So in order to ease some of these challenges you've mentioned, are there any exciting new projects or fundraisers coming up in the next 6 to 12 months? And if they are, how can people get involved?
I think the main thing we're working on at the moment is our Neuro conference on May the 12th next year, which will be talking about the work that Headway Suffolk does, and you're very kindly sponsoring it. So people coming along to the conference, finding out what we do. We're actually focusing on brain injury and crime. We do find that some of our clients, especially during lockdown, have been in trouble with the police. So how can they be supported? So we've got judges and magistrates, Police and Crime Commissioner Tim Passmore's coming to talk from his perspective about what happens when somebody with a brain injury ends up in custody. So our conference is a fundraiser. We do raise some money over that. But it's also profile building and telling people about brain injury and the work that Headway Suffolk does. So that's our main event. We hope to have a bike ride in April, going 30 miles around the countryside in Suffolk. We had to cancel this year's, which was a great disappointment because it's one of our main fundraisers. We're really hoping to make the most of it next year, get out in the fresh air, have some exercise, great team building for corporates and companies. So that's one of our biggest fundraisers. And we are still working on building the Professor Stephen Hawking Neuro Centre, which would offer level 2 beds and nursing beds for people with brain injury. We were about to start building that in Ipswich when COVID struck. And because we're working with Ipswich Borough Council, that had to be shelved because they had other things to do around COVID. And we weren't sure how neuro rehab was going to be delivered in the future after we'd all discovered the new virtual world. But having come through that, people are still saying residential rehab beds are essential straight after brain injury. So a lot of my time and a lot of my board's time is looking at Professor Stephen Hawking Neuro Centre, which we still hope to build in 2022 or 2023. So they're the main things we've got, and just keep going, quite honestly, is challenge enough for us at the moment.
I can imagine, and huge congratulations to you and your team for continuing to provide all of that support and care that I'm sure families just wouldn't have been able to cope without during this very difficult period. As you said, we are sponsoring the Headway Suffolk conference, and I'm also sure we'll be able to support some of those other initiatives you've mentioned in the next few months.
That's brilliant, and we're very grateful for your support.
No problem. That concludes another episode of the London Legal Podcast. We hope you've enjoyed it, and I'd like to say a big thanks to Helen for taking time out of her busy schedule to provide a real insight into Headway Suffolk and the work they do. If you or someone you know has experienced a traumatic head injury and may need help or support, give Headway Suffolk or HJA a call on the numbers below. Be sure to follow Headway Suffolk and HJA on social media so you can keep up to date with the latest podcasts and help and advice. And if you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. And of course, if you found the podcast useful, please do share it with your friends. Many thanks.
You've been listening to the London Legal Podcast, presented to you by Hodge, Jones and Allen Solicitors.